All right, guys, welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Again, sorry for the delay. A little late on this Monday morning. Had some technical difficulties, but got them all worked out. Scotty B, good morning. Good to see you. And anybody else that'll join the stream either now or later on if you watch this later on in the morning. Again, we apologize for not giving you a bit of a heads up and for joining a little bit late. But we are thrilled to be here on this Monday morning to talk about a wild week zero, very wild week zero in college football. But this week is the big week, right? This is the week that things really get going. We've got, Scott said, he's got Baylor football, big Baylor fan, others first games. This is when college football is really going to be at its peak, right? Thursday through Monday, nonstop games, backyard brawl, marquee matchups on Saturday, 3 ranked versus ranked matchups. It's going to be phenomenal. So we're here to kind of break down what we've watched this weekend. Also start to preview what we've got coming up in week 1. CCD, good morning to you. And guys, we're here today with college football encyclopedia, Connor Hibbett himself, who is here to kind of help us break down kind of what we watched and what we've got coming up later this week. And if you guys don't know who Connor is, you don't know who college football encyclopedia is, we have his Instagram link in our description. We've had that in the description for the majority of this season. Post some phenomenal analysis and content over there. We've actually worked with him before. He was actually the one that helped create those graphics during our predictions. We always give him a shout out there. So make sure to go give him a follow. Check out his content over on Instagram. The link again down in the description. But Connor, how's it going this morning?
It's going great. It's college football season. It's kind of hard not to be happy. So thank you for having me on here too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're thrilled to have you. And here in a second, we'll kind of really jump into everything. I know you've got some stuff you want to talk about as well. But I guess we'll just kind of start real quick on week zero, specifically the Nebraska game. Matthew, good morning to you, my man. Obviously, he summed it up. Nebraska blew it. Scott Frost's call was what gave away the game. And I agree with Matthew there. You look at a Nebraska team that entered this game with so much uncertainty, so many questions. And before I get to that, CCD, I appreciate you, my man. Again, appreciate that super chat donation a lot. Took Vandy over Hawaii. So here's some money back. Hey, I appreciate you. I also took Vandy over Hawaii. I told you to take Vandy over Hawaii, and they covered. We'll talk about that in a second. So thank you so much for that donation, man. I appreciate it. But you look at Scott Frost in Nebraska, a team that entered so much uncertainty, 3-9 last year, 8 of the 9 losses by 1 possession. Everybody thought they'd come in here and win this game because they had, new coordinator, new quarterback, the urgency. You're up by 11 twice, 14-3 and 28-17. The third quarter couldn't have gone any better for Nebraska. And then he pulls the onside kick, which it blew my mind. I mean, and people are going to play devil's advocate and they're going to say, well, he probably just thought they had all the momentum on their side. And if Nebraska recovered, then they one more touchdown and put the game away. You're right. But what I can tell you is had he kicked it deep, Northwestern would not have driven the length of the field and scored a touchdown. So your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, well, and at the time of the onside kick, there were a lot of, like you mentioned, there was momentum in Nebraska's favor, but there was also a lot of, should I say, not maybe so sober Nebraska fans that made up for most of the stadium seats, and they were going nuts. And Northwestern would have had possession, likely inside their own 25 to start. With Nebraska's kickoff teams actually did better. I mean, that was like, if there's a bright spot to point out for Nebraska, is that they're outside of the special team or outside of the onside kick, special teams actually performed a little bit better than last year's special teams. So if there is a bright spot, maybe it's that. But who knows if that's going to mean anything in close games, because Nebraska still likes to shoot themselves in the foot. But if you have momentum, I think the last thing you want to do is to try to give Northwestern, who, yes, they had over 500 yards of offense, but they were very vanilla in their play calling, which is kind of a sad thing for Nebraska's defense, like a thing to be concerned about, because it's not like Northwestern has Aiden O'Connell slinging the rock back there. So, I mean, that's kind of a bad sign for Nebraska's defense. And honestly, coming into this year, Nebraska had question marks on the interior of their defensive line and the secondary, and that got exposed. Secondary didn't tackle very well. Like I mentioned, vanilla play calling from Northwestern, very conservative. Like there were times in the game where Northwestern was on good drives, and on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, they were like, we'll just settle for 3 points. We'll just run the ball. I mean, they were trying. It's like they were saying, here in Nebraska, you do something about it. You go out there and beat us. We're not going to lose, but you have to beat us. And Nebraska, right now, there is no sense of confidence in these urgent moments for the Cornhuskers. They're going to find ways to lose games right now. I think it's a mental thing with them. There's a mental block that they just cannot cross the threshold on. And honestly, it's a sad thing to see because honestly, Nebraska power ranking would suggest they're a pretty good team, right? But they just cannot figure out how to win close games.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, you summed it up very well. It's I think 21 one possession losses for Scott Frost since he arrived in Lincoln, and I do think it's a mental thing. I think you've got a team last year that was so close. Instead of going 3-9, easily could have gone even just won 7 or 8 games with the amount of one possession losses they had. Couldn't get over that hump, and coming into this year, that's all they've heard is that people joke about the best 3-9 team ever. When will Nebraska get there? They know the urgency. They've read the news. They've listened to analysts. They've everything like that when it comes to we just got to get to a bowl game. And someone could say Nebraska came in a little, I think, overconfident in this game because you're facing a Northwestern team that also went 3-9, but was nowhere near, I would say, dare I say, as good as Nebraska last year. Nebraska won 56-7 over Northwestern in 2021. So did we think they'd win as bad again? No. I do want to agree with you on the play calling on both sides. I felt like, granted, Mark Whipple's offense that he ran at Pittsburgh with Kenny Pickett, kept Pickett in the pocket for the majority of the time. We did see him escape plenty, like in that ACC championship game with the fake slide. But Casey Thompson's got the wheels, and they really didn't showcase that very much. At Nebraska. And there were a lot of times I felt on Saturday that Casey Thompson, they could have utilized the RPO. They could have utilized his legs and mobility. I know he had a rushing touchdown, but it was from like 1 yard out. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't do anything. I mean, so I don't know why they didn't utilize that much because I think it really could have stretched the field and kept the Northwestern defense honest. He still threw for almost 350 yards, had a phenomenal debut. But the defense couldn't stop anything. And so from a coaching standpoint, from a mental standpoint, and you're right, I think Northwestern knew that. I think Northwestern got in their head because you're right, they were very conservative, weren't really getting very aggressive in the red zone. It was like, hey, if you're going to leave us open, we'll score the touchdown. But if not, we're content with 3 because we really don't feel like you're going to be able to come down there and beat us. And they didn't.
Well, that was your stereotypical week 0 game. It was just very vanilla play calling, especially at first. And, Scott Frost even said in the post-game press conference that he thought the play calling could have been a little bit more creative. I think that was his way of saying we need to run the quarterback. We need to run more because there was really no running game. And the one time Nebraska got creative with the running game in the fourth quarter, they were able to pick up a couple first downs and then they went right back to passing. And the thing is, Northwestern's defense, I know you're probably going to have some people saying, oh, even year, Northwestern's back. Okay, I would not be so quick to say that. I think they took advantage of some weaknesses on Nebraska's defense, which I do not know can be addressed because they got seriously pushed around at time, and they're undersized. They don't have much depth on the defensive line. This is not last year's Nebraska defense by any means. The offense might be better though. Casey Thompson is probably going to keep them in some of these games, especially in the first half. First half of the season. I mean, got a pretty manageable schedule, so you can win some games there. But this Nebraska team, they got some concerns on defense because I'm going to tell you this right now. Northwestern, again, you might have some people say, "Oh, Northwestern's back." They've got a heck of a difficult schedule. If Northwestern still ends up making a bowl game, I'll be a little surprised. But their over/under was 3.5. Given their non-conference, they should start 4-0, so they should hit that over. They'll have a chance against Illinois at home to end the season, but I don't know how many wins we're looking at for the Wildcats, and neither for the Cornhuskers.
Yeah, and CCD in our comments immediately saying that too, that Northwestern still isn't a bowl team, even with the win, because the schedule is so brutal. And when we broke that down in our predictions too, I mean, and you hate doing that, right? I love Pat Fitzgerald. I love the culture. I love his passion for the game. And so you're right. And you're right. People are going to be very quick to go, here we go again. It's an even year. Northwestern's going to go win the West. But I agree with you, and I agree with CCD that the schedule simply is too difficult. They made, this is a Nebraska team. We knew they weren't going to be elite by any means. Maybe we thought maybe a bowl game, but they went out there and made Ryan Helensky look like a Heisman candidate, and we know that simply just isn't the case.
How many times did Helensky actually throw the ball down the field? I think I counted 6-7 times. One of them was for a touchdown. Another time it resulted in a fumble. the one decent, what should I say? It was an aggressive play by Nebraska's defense, but it was the one time they really created havoc because there was no pressure on Helinski. So, I mean, the offensive line we figured was a strength for Northwestern coming into the season. 4 or 5 starters back, including one of the best offensive tackles in the country and a top prospect for the NFL for next year's draft. I mean, Fitzgerald even said a couple weeks ago in Big Ten Media Days that this was the best Northwestern offensive line in probably about 15, 16, 17 years. So they obviously felt confident about that, but there's not too many defensive lines that they're going to be able to just lean on like they did with Nebraska's defensive line. And I'm going to say this again. I think this is more of a concerning thing for Nebraska, more so than breakthrough for Northwestern.
I think that's a fantastic way of putting it, actually. Is it's a bad thing. Is it more concerning for Nebraska than a breakthrough for Northwestern? Because at the end of the day, a lot of us still believe Northwestern will fall short of a bowl game. It's, we see upsets all the time. People freak out. You beat one good team doesn't mean you're going to win the Natty. Doesn't mean you're going to win the division. It happens. But for Nebraska, the concern is certainly there going forward. And I addressed a few comments before we move on to our next game real quick. I'm looking at, through here, Scott out here saying that, first off, he believes Matt Campbell would leave Iowa State for Nebraska. And that's one thing that I would be very interested to see. Nebraska being the big-time school they are, at least they want to pride themselves on, who would eventually leave for that job. I think it is inevitable at this point that Scott Frost gets fired by season's end, unless at season's end at the latest, unless he just starts to run the table. But honestly, I don't see them beating Oklahoma here in a few weeks. The back half of their schedule is very difficult. They've got Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa. So many tough teams in November that if they say they lost all those games, it's 4 plus Oklahoma, that's 5. So you're already at 6 losses. Who knows? And I agree with Scott there. The buyout is going to be the thing. And I think his buyout starts to go down in October. So Scott, your question there is, it probably isn't a buyout concern. I believe it decreases in October, either at the beginning of the month or midway through.
After the bye week, it goes. Yeah.
Who's that?
After the bye week, it goes down. So
so after the bye week, his buyout goes down, and that might be what I would. Look, if the season's lost, firing a coach isn't going to really help your cause. In Nebraska, if you fired him right now, they're not going to turn the ship around and go 11-1.
No.
So at this point, let him finish it out. Maybe you get a couple miracle victories or good games here and there. But overall, if your intent's to fire him, might do it for the least amount of money as possible. And I do love the stat. I love the stat because people are so quick to judge, especially athletic departments, that Bo Pelini in 7 years lost 27 games, and in 5 years, Scott Frost has lost 30. I saw a stat out there that said if Scott Frost were to win his next 50 games, so 50 games in a row, he would still have a worse record than what Bo Pelini had. And so Nebraska, I think a lot of times with these big time programs like Nebraska, Auburn, places like that, they kind of get pretty much on their high horse, and they think that we deserve to win natties. We should be contenders. And if they don't reach that level within the first or second year of a new coach, they're ready to bolt, or the world's falling apart. And what people I think need to understand is that in the world of college football, you're not going to win a national championship every year. You're not going to win your conference or division every year. I don't care if you were a blue blood back in the 90s or the 70s even. It doesn't matter because the times have changed. And that's certainly the case for Nebraska, who, as Rick would say, Rick Sanchez, Rick and Morty, that Nebraska can't get past its shadow self. So it's a very, very big issue. I do want to kind of switch gears real quick. Connor, just briefly touch. I think the other marquee if you want to call it that, was Vanderbilt in Hawaii on Saturday night. And obviously it ended up being a horrible upset, 63-10 in favor of Vanderbilt. And I think a lot of people, first off, it's been a long time since we've seen the Vanderbilt team play that well, regardless of who it was against. This is a team that last year lost by 20 points at home to East Tennessee State. So the drastic difference in play between one year to another, it shows that Clark Lee's teams, I think, is improving. Even though Hawaii lost so much, returned I think the second least amount of protection in the entire country. But Mike Wright and this Vanderbilt team, they looked good. Your thoughts on that and what it could mean for the rest of the season for Vanderbilt?
So I've already seen some week 0 overreactions. We just discussed one of the matchups that will have overreactions from the Cornhuskers and Wildcats. Another overreaction was, is Vanderbilt going to make it to a bowl game this year? Are they really that much improved? I have to address something here. I discussed this on my Instagram back in early July. I pointed out 3 teams in the Mountain West that were the last 3 teams in returning production. There's 131 teams in the FBS. It's hard to be slotted last in anything, yet there were 3 teams from the same conference who managed to do that: Wyoming, Hawaii, and Nevada. And you tell me, how good did those 3 teams look this past Saturday?
Yeah, right. Wyoming getting murdered by Illinois, Hawaii by Vandy, and then Nevada was able to pull off the win over New Mexico State, but not pretty.
And New Mexico State outgained Nevada. And it should also be noted, Nevada won the turnover margin by about 4. I don't know how often they're going to be able to have those kind of stats. And, I'm sorry. Yeah. So New Mexico State had like 4 or 5 turnovers in that game, still outgained Nevada, and yet Nevada still found a way to win. They're not going to be able to do that against many other teams in the country. So congratulations for Nevada for winning a football game. I can't guarantee you how many more they're going to win.
That's fantastic. You lose Jay Norvell off to Colorado State, and we looked at that, and we didn't do too deep of a dive into the Mountain West, but obviously Nevada might be lucky to win anywhere from I'd say 1 to 3 games, maybe. Yeah. It's going to be a rough, and same for Hawaii, same for Wyoming, all those teams that I think the most shocking would probably be Wyoming, because Craig Bold typically does a pretty solid job there, but they just lose so much. Quarterback questions, running back questions, defense very shaky. Illinois looked really, really good against them. But again, no one, just like Vanderbilt, just like Northwestern, just like Illinois, don't get too deep into the hype yet. It's still week 0. And that all those teams that, maybe played well, we're playing much inferior opponents. And so we don't need to jump the gun too quickly on that.
Right. And something else, Vanderbilt, if you were to look at their stats, almost every single guy that attempted a rush averaged about 9 yards a carry against Hawaii. If you were to look at the film, Hawaii, there was 0 penetration from either offense or defensive line from the Rainbow Warriors. And Vanderbilt, I don't care who was running the football, they were not touched until about 5-6 yards down the field. And even then, literally maybe touched, not tackled, until about 9 or 10, 11, 12 yards down the field. So to me, this is more of a question of for Hawaii, Nevada, and Wyoming. And think about this. How good are Vanderbilt, Illinois, and New Mexico State? Like, I don't believe those teams are going to be in national title contention, are they?
Right.
So really ugly sign for those other 3 programs. And I don't want to pin anyone down, but it's going to be a long year for those Mountain West schools. But Vanderbilt, I'll touch on them real quick. They looked improved, and it was predictable to see a Clark Lee defense, in their second year to be improved and be more aggressive, right? But how many games in the SEC are they really going to win? Because if you're to look at their schedule, a lot of their swing games, if you will, potential swing games, are on the road. And I mean, I know Sam Hartman's out for Wake Forest, but I don't know. I'm not willing to overreact and say, Vanderbilt 6 wins. Probably still going to be a 3-win team this year, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think that's a solid take. Honestly, you look at the rest of their schedule. It depends on how well. For me, it's how well their defense is. Mike Wright and that dual threat ability is a problem for any team. I think not as dangerous as some other quarterbacks, but they should be able to get past Elon next week or in 2 weeks. Can't remember if they got the bye week after week 0. But obviously, Wake Forest, I wouldn't jump the gun on that one yet. Even without Sam Hartman, I still think that's the better team. They might be able to beat Northern Illinois. I originally pegged that as a loss. That is a game that, after looking at Vanderbilt, because that CCD just said, doesn't really matter who you are, beating anybody by 53 points, especially, again, after losing your opener to an FCS team by 20 a year ago, definitely shows some improvement.
It's
improvement. The culture and talent, I think, has changed at Vanderbilt. But if you're, a Vanderbilt fan or anything, and Scotty's saying the same thing, maybe Missouri could be a win for Vanderbilt, because I'm not very high on the Tigers at all this year. And Vanderbilt, let's keep in mind, last year, dropped 28 on Missouri, only lost by 9, 37-28. So that is a positive. I agree with you. This isn't a bowl team. 3-4 wins still, but for Vanderbilt, that's considered a success. 2-10 last year, and I think for a lot of Vanderbilt people and fans, you're just looking for improvement. You're looking as a fan to not want to be turning the game off after the end of the first quarter. You want to be in the games And I think Vanderbilt will be in more games than they were last year. And last thing I want to do before we transition to some of your takes, Connor, this guy right here, we've got Matt Byers as a New Mexico State student and fan. So I love getting actual students on the streams and people that are there immersed in the culture and immersed in hearing all the beats and what the university is saying. He believes New Mexico State much more improved than last year. I love the hire of Jerry Kill. I love his passion. I obviously love his love for the game, but it's a very major rebuilding project there. Obviously, it's a Mexico State team that went to a bowl game in 2016, 2017. That was like the first one in 15 years. So and they had a pretty good offense that year. Had a pretty good offense. But besides that, has struggled and many hasn't pegged as the worst team in the country. So I just wanted to address that from Matt. Obviously, I love getting students and people that are really immersed in the culture and the fan base on here. New Mexico State, I hope they improve. Hope they are more competitive, but it's not going to translate in the win column, that's for sure.
Well, I was actually about to say they actually could win a few games this year. So obviously they lost to Nevada, who's was last in returning production. But get a load of this. So I'm trying to pull up their schedule here. Let's see if I have it here. New Mexico State, they play like Lamar, UMass. They play Hawaii. So they could actually, I think they play UConn as well. So what's funny is when I was doing my preview on them, and I had this in my preview that I sent you, don't be surprised if by the season's end, New Mexico State actually has like 3 wins, maybe. I mean, I know the national perception would be like 1 or none for them for the win total, but I mean, I'm not just saying just because a team's last in returning production, they're going to lose every game. But we just saw the tape from Hawaii, and they just got beat at home 63-10 to Vanderbilt. And we'll see what that means in terms of like power rankings. But, New Mexico State, they definitely looked better at the line of scrimmage than Hawaii did. I'll say that. Skill position can still improve. They had some drops in the receiving core. But the Aggies, like I said, I think they could win a couple games this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very excellent point with the comments you made with the teams they've got to play. CCD making it Hawaii, FIU, Lamar, New Mexico, UTEP. Possible winnable games for New Mexico State. He had about 2-10. And yeah, I mean, winning in UMass, obviously. So winning a couple games there, 2-3, not out of the realm of possibility. I think a lot of that does attest to coaching. I do. I think that teams that typically, when you hire a new coach, they come in there and immediately start changing the culture. These players start to believe that, hey, maybe we actually can win after only winning none or 1 game a year for years and years and years. I think Kill is starting to change that culture a little bit, which is, kind of nice to see. So I just want to give Matt a shout out. Absolutely. He thinks they can win 4. As Connor said, the schedule very favorable to the extent where maybe they could swing 4 games, which would be a major success for a first-year head coach. And absolutely, Matt, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us. Someone want to give him a shout out as well. And Waves on Swim, Hottie Toddy, big Ole Miss fan. So good morning to you and good morning to everybody else here. Again, we are here again with College Football Encyclopedia, Connor Hibbett. Check out his Instagram link down in the description of this video, as well as all of our other videos. You can go follow him there. Again, some great college football analysis and posts over on Instagram on his stories, on his actual posts. And real quick, before we jump into you, Connor, last thing, Utah State. I forgot about that game. Utah State beating UConn by 11. Really great question by SBO Kennels. Has UConn taken a step forward under new coach Jim Mora, or did Utah State take that big of a step back?
Okay, so what's really interesting, Vegas had this spread at 26 before they kicked off, and UConn jumped up 14-0. Now, for those of you who may not pay attention to all the schedules, the when, the where, when you play teams, that's important to know in these kind of contests because no offense to UConn, I'm not willing to overreact from week 0. I know there's going to be some who do, and that's fine. I respect that, but I do my best to try to not to and still look at it from a realistic standpoint. Utah State plays Alabama next weekend. Now, if I were just to depict this last performance from another Aggies, we just talked about New Mexico State, but now Utah State, they're down 14-0 quick against UConn, and then they outscored them 31-6 for the rest of the game. They got Alabama next weekend. If you're going into the UConn game, wouldn't you be willing to say that there's a possible chance that Utah State was looking slightly ahead to Alabama and then realized, oh, we have a game to play this weekend. UConn actually came to play. It's 14-0. We got to get back on our high horse here. So it's 24-14, and they scored 24 points in the second quarter. I will say this, though. UConn's defense did play very well, especially in the second half of that game. And I'll say this, too. It was 24-20 in the fourth quarter, and there was a very questionable pass interference call against UConn. It was 3rd and 15, I want to say. So, and Utah State would have likely just pinned them deep to try to play field position as they were up by 4 and not just a field goal. But again, Vegas had the spread at 26. And if you were to take off those first 14 points from UConn and Utah State actually playing probably more mentally into the game, it was 31-6. That's a 25-point differential. So was Vegas right on the money, or is Utah State slightly overvalued? I will say this, Utah State last year, they won 11 games. They had a win expectancy of around 8. In fact, it was slightly less. I want to say it was like 7.7 something. So obviously they overachieved, right? Well, they lost over 3,000 yards receiving from last year's receiving core. So I did have Utah State as an 8-4 team, regressing slightly in the win total. And that's still what I could see with Utah State. They still have a really experienced quarterback and a really good coach. He's going to get the most out of his players. He always does. If you were to look over his track record, how many times is he like 7-5 or 8-4? He's usually around that record. So that's what I expect out of Utah State. But, I'm sure Mora is going to have UConn playing at a more aggressive level. And what I love about these first weeks for these UConns and the New Mexico States of the world, it can set a new mentality. And even if they're not like winning, or even if they're not winning on the football field, the mentality has changed and there's a new vibe with the program and a new energy. So that's something positive to take from these kinds of games.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic. I was a fan of Jim Mora a long, long time ago, and I think that was a big time hire for UConn, bringing a guy in that kind of has been out of the coaching ranks for a little while, but has coached at a very high level. And again, kind of what we mentioned with New Mexico State, bringing in a guy that, as the way you worded it, was changing the culture and making these teams, believe they can win. Because you take teams like UMass and UConn and New Mexico State that have, these independent teams that have struggled for so long and are consistently are winning anywhere from 0 to maybe 2 games a year, not competitive in any of those games really. It's frustrating, and they immediately come in for UConn, and there was some new life. For a UConn team, typically against Utah State, again, they were 26-point favorites. I think many would have thought Utah State would have run away with that game by the end of the first half, but they came out firing on all cylinders. UConn did, and I think you're going to see that kind of down the road. A UConn team that, again, they're going bowling. No, they're going to be super competitive. No, but could win 2 to 4 games in 2022 just because of the new coach, and obviously, as CCD saying, wishing Roberson never got hurt. Because that would have kept it maybe even closer. I mean, 24-20 in the fourth quarter against a team that won the Mountain West last year. That's a very, very good start and shows some significant change for UConn heading into this year. So, fantastic points there.
With the transfer portal, these teams could actually, pick up some pretty decent players. I'm not saying they're going to pick up a Caleb Williams, but, they'll pick up a pretty decent player that's an upgrade at what they previously had. And that can make them potentially a more competitive team, especially if they get a pretty good quarterback who can stand in the pocket, make some throws under pressure, maybe get a couple of experienced wide receivers. And they could form a better and more competitive team. So that's, with the transfer portal, it's going to be something to watch for. And, we'll see. I would not be surprised, though, speaking of the transfer portal, to see some more regulation with that in the coming months, like transfer windows, something like that. I think we could see something like that come out. And of course, with regulation with NIL, of course, that's another topic for another day. We could literally have a 3-hour show about that.
Well, yeah. Don't even get me started on the transfer portal and NIL. I've gone on some tangents on these live streams before about that. We did a whole video over the NIL. It's pros and cons, but we won't dive too deep into that. What I do want to do is, again, a second ago, we kind of highlighted your Instagram page again, and we're telling people what you've been posting over there. And I know today you brought over a couple of your I won't even call them hot takes, but a couple of your big takes for the year. Every year you put out your Encyclopedia 8. It's your big 8 picks. All 8 of those picks, guys, have been posted to Connor's Instagram page. Again, the link for that down in the description below. But you brought over a handful of your favorites that you kind of wanted to share with us today. So I was going to kind of briefly discuss that, kind of some quick points on the 4 that you brought over. We kind of discussed those real quick. So you start with whatever your favorite is. Let's hear them.
Okay, well, let's start with the first one to kind of get us warmed up, give us a little bit of that energy to wake us up. Oregon State, I think they are primed for a really good season. And the way I should have opened up was OSU, they're primed for a really good season. Oklahoma State, Ohio State, no, Oregon State. I think the Beavers, leave it to the Beavers. Have you seen that old show from the 50s?
Oh,
Leave
yeah.
It to Beaver?
She gets people out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Leave it to the Beavers this season to surprise some people. I tell you, if you were to look at whatever divisions mean for the Pac-12 this year, if you were to look at what used to be essentially the North Division, they've got 3 new coaches, and then there's Stanford and Cal, who are going to both struggle to make bowl games. In fact, I don't think either will. And then there's Oregon State. And they've got a lot of continuity in the coaching staff. They have their deepest roster in years, potentially 20 years, basically. They got a lot of experience, and there's a quiet confidence around their program right now. I mean, there's really talk within their program that they could potentially win the conference this year. Now, I'm not willing to go out there and say, a take. My take is not Oregon State winning the conference. My take is Oregon State making it back-to-back years, bowl games and bowl eligibility in back-to-back years. And given their schedule, which is especially a gauntlet in the first half, like they play Boise State at Fresno State, then they play Montana State, and then they play USC at Utah. That is a gauntlet. But I'm here to say this. They are not going to go 0-4 outside of the game against Montana State, obviously, but they're not going to go 0-4 in those other games. I think they're going to beat Boise, quite frankly, and I would not be surprised to see them win 1, if not, dare I say, 2, against potentially USC. In fact, FPI actually kind of likes Oregon State. They give them a fair chance, about 40, I want to say it's about 41, 42% in that game. But that's because USC is kind of overvalued. There's a quality and quantity theory that I have. I discussed this in my preview. If you want my preview, DM my page and I will email you my preview for free. I cannot promise you how much longer, if that preview is going to be with no charge, however much longer that'll be. But take advantage of that if you can. I'd love it too. I'd love it if you take a look at it. But I think Oregon State could surprise some people this year. I would not be shocked to see them win 8 and challenge for 9 wins because, they were undefeated at home last season, and 2 of their 3 toughest games, I would say, 2 of their 4 toughest games, including Fresno, they're going to be at home against USC and Oregon. And I don't know, again, how many games Oregon State's going to win in those first 5. I think it'll be 3-2 if I had to guess. But I think they could go on a midseason tear, win 6 games in a row. Their schedule eases up, and they get Oregon at the last game of the season. And there's a potential for them to be on a 5-game winning streak. So we'll see.
Yeah, excellent take. We also have Oregon State going back to a bowl game. I think we've got them around 6-6. I really do like what Jonathan Smith has done up in Corvallis, though, and obviously I'm really a fan of their defensive line this year. I mean, very, very deep, very talented, and great breakdown. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the first half of that schedule is brutal. I do agree with you. They do defeat Boise. They should be able to beat Montana State, although they're no pushover out of the FCS. With the runner-up last year to North Dakota State. And then obviously Fresno. I think Fresno State is going to be a tipping point there. Obviously, it's on the road. Jake Haener back. Jeff Tedford back as their head coach there. And that's going to be a very, very tough game. We saw Fresno State last year nearly beating Oregon, did beat UCLA. So that's not going to be an easy game. If you're able to, I think those are the first 3 games. So if they come out of that 3-0, easily could see Oregon State as a top 25 team. Heading into those very difficult conference games that you mentioned against USC and Utah. And those are going to be really the big tests to see where this team is at and whether they really could be that dark horse contender in the Pac-12. So
And I quickly want to touch on that quality over quantity thing that I mentioned. So the way that I view that is quality would be individual playmakers. So what is the overall talent level of a particular individual? So for example, USC, they are a quality over quantity team, in my opinion. They have quality individuals, Caleb Williams, Jordan Addison, a couple of others, but they lack quantity. So quality would be the individual playmakers. They've got, potential All-Americans. but then they lack quantity. Quantity is a number of things. That's what quantity means. It's a number. So they lack in a number of positions that they can rely on because there's still questions across the USC depth chart. I mean, they don't have a lot of depth on defense. Defensive line got pushed around last year. Linebackers are relatively inexperienced. They did bring a couple transfers to help with that, although they've struggled with some injuries in fall camp. Secondary doesn't have a lot of depth. Offensive line got pushed around last year. We'll see if they improve. So that's my point is they have quality, but they lack in quantity in position groups that they can point to and say, yeah, we can rely on them. Yeah, we can rely on them too. But that's what the preview magazines love. They love quality. Those quality individuals are going to get talked about more than quantity. And Oregon State, now, who knows? They might have a couple guys get drafted. We'll see who develops. They do have a lot of upperclassmen, so maybe somebody breaks through. They do have a very active linebacker room, and they're all upperclassmen, so I am excited to see what they do. But they have more quantity than quality because they have more position groups that they can say, yeah, we can rely on them to do their job. Their offensive line is very underrated. It was actually it graded out, according to Pro Football Focus, as one of the best offensive lines last year in the country. And they returned 3 starters. In fact, basically 4 when they get back a guy from injury from fall camp last year. Running back room is as deep as it's ever been, and they love to run the football. Wide receiver room, a lot of upperclassmen, quarterbacks experience, defense, a lot of upperclassmen, ton of depth. So quantity over quality for Oregon State. Those quantity over quality teams, those are always interesting teams. They don't always break through, but you are going to have a couple of them break through. In fact, the next take that I want to get to is a quantity over quality team. But yeah, don't be surprised if Oregon State surprises this year.
Yeah, I mean, I reading through these comments, I know we got a couple guys that have at 7-5, and you gotta have as a dark horse candidate in the Pac-12. And another thing I'll add to that is you mentioned that USC team, and we'll let that transition into your next take. But obviously, you mentioned how those preview magazines, they love the quality over quantity because that's easy, right? Oh, they've got this great big, new quarterback, Caleb Williams, he's going to be great. New coach and Lincoln Riley, they're going to be great. Jordan Addison, and not only do the preview magazines love that, but the Associated Press does too, which is why I don't trust much of what they put out, because ranking a team that went 4-8 to number 14 in the country to start the year, I think is a little bit outlandish and jumping the gun. But you'll get me on a rant about the Associated Press and how they handle things if we go on too long. So segueing from all of that into your next take, go ahead.
So my next take would be Purdue makes the Big Ten championship, and I think Purdue could be one of your, shall I say, potential Cinderella teams this season. Now, by Cinderella, there are different degrees of Cinderella here. No playoff. Absolutely not. Because they have to play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship if they got there. And I'm going to say this right now. I don't think anybody outside of maybe, and that maybe is in all caps, outside of maybe Alabama is beating Ohio State this year. Certainly nobody in the Big Ten will. And that includes Notre Dame. So, Notre Dame is not going to beat Ohio State either. But Purdue, I think, has a really good chance of getting to the Big Ten championship. Their crossover slate is about as manageable as it gets. Crossover slate against the Big Ten East I'm referring to. They avoid Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan. Now, I should also let you know the last 2 Big Ten West teams to avoid those 3 in their crossover slate both won 10 regular season games. Minnesota in 2019, Iowa last season. And if you were to look at Minnesota and Iowa in those 2 years, their AP ranking, college football playoff ranking, was much better than their power ranking, would suggest that they were kind of given a path to set them up to have a successful season. So Purdue, not an elite team by any means, but there is a very good chance that this team is ranked pretty high in the AP and college football playoff rankings by the end of the season. But there is an also better chance their power ranking is going to be much lower than that ranking. So Purdue opens up with Penn State this coming Thursday. In fact, if you guys don't know about that game, I would suggest you watch that. That's a huge game for both teams. Whoever wins that game, I think, has a really good chance of finishing the season in the top 15, if not top 10. If Purdue wins that game, though, they're going to be discussed like Texas A&M back in 2020 after they beat Florida. Because Texas A&M, after they beat Florida, everybody started pointing out the Aggies' remaining schedule. Like, my gosh, they just beat one of the more difficult teams in the schedule. And that was after they had lost to Bama just before that Florida game. But after they beat the Gators, remember everybody started pointing out A&M like, my gosh, when are they going to lose again? This is a path to set them up pretty well. We'll see what happens by the end of the season. And then obviously A&M just missed out on the playoff. There was the A&M Notre Dame controversy. But I tell you, if Purdue beats Penn State, everybody's going to start talking about Purdue. They're going to be in the spotlight. It's a blackout, by the way, for the Penn State game, for the Boilermakers. It's a blackout. And obviously that's been a little bit famous in the media because of what happened a few years ago against Ohio State, no less. So I'm sure if Purdue were to beat Penn State, everyone's going to start looking at them saying, my gosh, look at this team's schedule. They just probably beat the hardest team on their schedule. And it's amazing how quick people, change their thought process in hindsight. And everybody talks in hindsight. But you watch out for the Boilermakers. Even if they lose that game, even if they do, they can still win the West Division given their crossover slate and how their schedule sets up. Because honestly, I think Wisconsin's overvalued this year. And we'll see about Minnesota. I know there's some dark horse talk with Minnesota, but their schedule, even though they avoid Ohio State and Michigan, and that's what's going to be talked about, they've got more conference road games than home games. They're three out of their first four are on the road, and they got some questions at the line of scrimmage. And I mean, internal questions also within their program, not just questions with the preview magazines, questions within their own program as well. So, but one last thing about Purdue, this team had a schedule that had Notre Dame at Ohio State, Michigan State at Iowa last year in the regular season alone. And they managed to win 8 games. And what was quietly not discussed, Purdue finished as a 9-win team last year. That was their highest win total since the early 2000s. That's incredible with that schedule. And here's what's also really funny. So they ended last year playing some of the best football outside of the Tier 1 in college football. And what's also not discussed, they didn't even have a real starting quarterback until almost halfway through the season. And Aiden O'Connell put out those numbers starting as the real official starting quarterback like in week 5. And he still put out those numbers. And think about this. So his first start, they lost to Minnesota, despite outgaining Minnesota by like 150 yards in that monsoon. There was a huge rainstorm in that game. And after that, Purdue went on a tear. They beat Iowa, who they've quietly beaten 4 of the last 5 years, by the way. And they beat them decisively, 24-7. And you know what? I think they should have won by more than what they did at Iowa. And now they get them at home after a bye week. So yeah, the schedule sets up perfectly for Purdue this year. And their only 2 losses in their last 7 games last season, last 8 games, were Wisconsin, who they haven't beaten since 2003. So it's like you just chalked it up as an L. And then at Ohio State, which outside, I guess, of Michigan, nobody was going to beat them at the end of the season. So this Purdue team is quietly on a roll entering this season. And I know the talk, if there's any talk with Purdue, it's that they lose David Bell, they lose George Karlaftis. Well, what's another team being discussed right now? Tennessee, right? And if I'm not mistaken, they beat a very hot Tennessee team who had just come off of wins against Kentucky, was giving Alabama a really good game through 3 quarters. They beat Tennessee without those 2 players, along with multiple other guys who were out, and they pretty much beat Tennessee on the road in their bowl game. They were a significant underdog in that game. So here's what should be discussed. Yes, they lose David Bell and George Karlaftis, but when you look at this year's schedule and a team that was playing as well as they were, how can you not say that this team is going to fall off the map? Like, this team, do not be shocked at all if they are one of the teams to start unranked and finish ranked really high. I think it's I want to say 19 of the last 20 years, there's been at least one team to start a season unranked in the polls and finish in the top 10. Purdue could be that team this year.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent take. Bold take for sure to get all the way to the top 10. But as you just mentioned, the schedule lines them up for them to do that and have that type of success. You and I have talked about that in the past, about how Aiden O'Connell, for you and me, is probably the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, only behind C.J. Stroud at Ohio State. The talent is there. They still return 8 starters defensively. So everybody, I think a lot of people do get kind of caught up in their head is, an offense and a defense isn't made up of one player. So yes, right, losing a star player does hurt. Don't get me wrong, but losing George Karlaftis doesn't ruin the defense. Losing, right, David Bell doesn't ruin the offense. O'Connell is still retooled and loaded. The blackout game, everybody's picking Penn State, but I will say this, that in Vegas right now, the spread for that game is only Penn State by about 3.5.
Yep.
If that tells you anything, in the years past, I think that game will probably be up to 10
Yeah.
or more for that game. And so it's very, very different in terms of how things are kind of changing the course for Purdue heading into this season. Again, if you win that, this is a Purdue team fresh off 9 wins for the first time since 2003. You beat Penn State. You're obviously looking pretty good because I do think Wisconsin is not going to be nearly as good as they've been in the past. I think I still have them winning 9 games. I actually do have Wisconsin winning the West over a tiebreaker by Purdue. I have them both at 9-3. But Wisconsin, I believe that game is in Madison. So yeah. Wisconsin, I do have winning that game, ultimately winning the tiebreaker. But Purdue wins that game, they're in. Or if Wisconsin slips up one somewhere else, which they very well could do, Purdue gets in there as well. So excellent takes there.
I want to quickly say one more thing about Purdue. So that quality over quantity. So quality with David Bell and George Karlaftis, that's what's going to get discussed. But really, if you were to look at Purdue's offense, it's nice to have a guy like a David Bell. Don't get me wrong. But what's also nice is to have a more by committee approach for the receiving corps, because now they can really spread the field out. And that's what they really started to do over the course of last year. At the end of the season, David Bell missed part-time in the last couple of games and obviously against Tennessee. And they were really starting to spread the field open instead of just leaning to one side wherever David Bell was. And that's when this offense really opened up. And here's one other thing. Jeff Brom has never had a solidified starting quarterback coming into his season, at least at Purdue. At Western Kentucky, he did. And he obviously put out crazy numbers when he was at Western Kentucky back like in 2014, 2015, when the Hilltoppers were competing for conference championships with a guy not named Bailey Zappi at the time. Right. But he finally has a solidified starting quarterback coming into his season. This is his first time at Purdue. Why isn't that discussed? Because this offense might be finally able to unleash itself. They bring in Charlie Jones from Iowa. They bring in Tyrone Tracy from Iowa. And I know people are going to be like, from Iowa, what receivers do they have? Okay, do you remember how good those Iowa special teams were last year? Well, the return man that was a big part of that was a guy by the name of Charlie Jones. And his playmaking ability is now going to be in the Purdue offense. How do you think that's going to go? I think that's going to go pretty well. And they also got a bike committee like Brock Thompson, TJ Sheffield. They got one of the best tight ends in the conference in Payne Durham. This team has got the perfect, almost like the perfect storm. It's not like one guy that's going to take over, but it's like they got multiple guys that they can rely on, and they got depth. And by the way, we talk about George Karlaftis leaving Purdue. The defense is going to take a step back. I don't know about that. I think the defense could be better. This is their deepest defensive line in program history. They go 3 deep at every position. Linebackers, they got a 6-year senior, a 7th-year senior, a holdover from the previous Purdue coaching staff. And then they got Jalen Graham as their hybrid. He's probably he's probably like their best prospect, I'd say, for NFL on the roster right now. And he's going to be kind of like that hybrid safety linebacker role. He's a 5th-year guy. And then they've got a veteran-laden secondary. They're all seniors. They got Cam Allen, Chris Jefferson at safety, quietly one of your better safety duos in the Big Ten. And then their cornerback room, it's been a little depleted throughout fall camp, but they are back. They're supposed to be back 100% healthy for Penn State. Jamari Brown, Corey Trice. These guys are like 6 foot, 200 pounds. They can play press, man. These coaches for Purdue, all the media will talk about they lose George Karlaftis, but there is a real confidence with this defense this year. They feel like they can even be better. I think this is going to be the breakthrough year for Purdue. So in terms of the transition talk for Purdue, I think that's coming next year, because they're probably going to be losing like 17, maybe even 18 starters. So
yeah, so they're loaded on both sides of the ball this year in terms of returning production, returning talent, which is, one of this is a year. We say every year with teams, this is, if you want to win your division, if you want this to be a special year, you've got to make it this year, because next year you're going to lose all that talent. And it's going to be, not that they're going to completely fall off the map, but you're not going to be in the hunt for a division crown like they are this year. So,
and they also have one of the better place kickers in the Big Ten, and Finneran. So they got special teams, quarterback. The offensive line is as deep as it's been. Not that it's great. I'm not saying they're going to be able to pound the rock this year. That's not what they do. but they might be able to be situational and pick up some 3rd and 2s this year, maybe some red zone scores. So this Purdue team, man, I think they're better than what people think.
Yeah, 100%. I do. I think, and a lot of the times when it comes to teams like this, it's the teams like this fly under the radar because they're not the biggest name. They're by far the biggest name in the Big Ten West. You had the perennial Wisconsin, obviously Nebraska, even though some people had them maybe win the division, and there's big name schools. We're going to talk about Nebraska. We're going to talk about Wisconsin. We're going to talk about Iowa. You forget about a team like Purdue or even Minnesota just because they're not historically as good and have not been as good historically. But as a team, as a coach, I would rather it be like that. I'd rather fly under the radar and catch people by surprise. I enjoy being the underdog, and I know Jeff Brom has certainly embraced that role since he arrived in West Lafayette. Connor, I know you've got 2 more little picks for us, or not, takes for us. I know we'll have to kind of go quickly here as we start to get a live stream. Good morning again, Matthew Hazelhorse. Good morning to you. And Talk is Pitt. Good to see you. Glad you're here for us today. I want to tell you, Talk is Pitt, we will have a backyard brawl prediction video coming out this afternoon. So anybody that's interested in the backyard brawl, stay tuned. Around 1 p.m. Central Time, we will have that video out. So I just wanted to get that plug out there. But Connor, I know you've got 2 more for us, so we're ready to hear them.
Well, I'll do one more. People remember things in groups of 3, so I'll keep it at 3.
Fair.
We can maybe have a little bit more time for some other discussion here with the comment section. Which, by the way, I can't see the comment section, so you're going to have to address that to me if for some reason.
Fair, I can do that.
But let's discuss something that I talked about this last year. I'm going to make something very clear to everybody, and I know some people are not going to want to hear this, but no Group of 5 team is making the college football playoff this year. And I talked about this last year with you, Alex. My number 1 take last year, and I made it way back in March of 2021, was that Cincinnati was going to make the college football playoff. There were a lot of factors, though, going into that. It wasn't just, oh, yeah, you saw their performance against Georgia, man. Like, that was really – they almost won that game. They almost went undefeated. Yeah, don't they have, like, Desmond Ridder coming back? Yeah, they should be pretty good again. Yeah, I think this team could potentially be the first Group of 5 team to make the playoff. That was part of it, but there was a lot more to it. They were returning a lot of production with the super senior factor. You're returning your guys once more. And let's talk about the super senior factor, what that did for college football last year real quick. I don't think people realize that when these teams have these breakthrough years, a lot of times, right, they're the surprise team, right? They're breaking through. They're finishing in the top 25. They typically have veteran-laden rosters. They typically lose a lot of that production, right? There are a lot of juniors and seniors. Well, that super senior factor, everybody can bring everybody back. Like, do you remember those numbers last year with Bill Connolly that he put out? It was like, I want to say it was like a 30% increase with production. Like, instead of it being like around 63%, it was like 73% that the average team brought back last year, which is absolutely nuts. Everybody was bringing back 15-plus starters. So Cincinnati, set themselves up well, and they played, in my opinion, an overvalued Notre Dame team. But that was a win. That was a winnable game. But it was kind of that happy medium. It was a little bit of an overrated Notre Dame team. Oh, I said overrated Notre Dame. My bad. It was a little bit of an overvalued Notre Dame team and a beatable Notre Dame team that would still be garnered respect. That Cincinnati would still be garnered respect for picking up that win. So it was like that happy medium, a win that would garner respect, but a winnable game that's not obviously like unwinnable, that a Group of 5 team is just losing. And because if a Group of 5 team loses a game, they're not making the playoff. But so Cincinnati, and then they started high in the polls. They started like number 9 last year in the poll. So that set them up very well too. So there was a lot of factors going into last year, none of which are occurring for Houston, UCF, BYU. You name the Group of 5 team, Fresno State, Air Force. It's not going to happen this year. There is no happy medium where you can point to and say, okay, you know what? They play an overvalued team that's going to garner them some respect. That's a winnable game. Okay, well, you know what? Texas Tech for Houston, that's a winnable game. But no offense to the Red Raiders, that is not going to garner them respect at the end of the season for the playoff. And that's even if Houston were to finish undefeated, they still wouldn't make the playoff because, again, they don't have that marquee win. And here's something else. And you notice how I said if Houston finishes undefeated, they could beat Texas Tech and still not finish undefeated. look at Houston's road game. Like if you were to look at Houston's schedule this year, Memphis, SMU, some of their UTSA, a lot of their most difficult games are going to be on the road. And if you were to look at Cincinnati's schedule last year, remember how they had that midseason stretch where they were pulling off some games, where those were a lot of road games, but those were teams that best case scenario would not beat Cincinnati. So Cincinnati kind of had that room for error. So they could essentially afford to play their B- or B+ game and still win those games. Houston can't afford that this year. They got to be playing their A+ game every single weekend. They can't trip up. Remember, no Group of 5 team is going to make the college football playoff with a loss. And this year, I don't think a Group of 5 team is making it, even if they're undefeated. BYU, if you were to go by the numbers and how the schedule sets up, BYU would have the best chance to make the playoff given their strength of schedule. But because of their strength of schedule, they're not going to be able to finish undefeated. So then again, there's that happy medium where, okay, you have to have the strength of schedule to set yourself up to garner some respect, but also not have it too difficult where you're going to be losing a game or two. And that's BYU. So there's no happy medium there for BYU, and there's no happy medium for Houston. And again, that's even if Houston finishes undefeated.
Yeah, and we don't believe Houston will. I mean, last year's a team that won 12 games. This year, I think they're going to fall short again, probably lose one or two. A little bit overrated. They also lose their star running back and Alton McCaskill, obviously, due to an injury. But what you mentioned with Cincinnati there is and one thing I will say is this, sometimes you can't. I've made this argument, especially with people that talk about Clemson, and I'll say how this loops back into the Group of 5 stuff. People always criticize teams like Clemson or a lot of ACC teams, even Pac-12 teams, because of their weak strength of schedule. And I always make the argument that they can't help that in the sense of you can't affect who you play within your own conference. It's not Clemson's fault that teams like Duke and Georgia Tech and now Florida State's down, but hopefully it's improved. But teams like that are just god awful, and they have to play them because they're in the conference. Yep. You can't help that. You can't change that. And a lot of these non-conference slates are scheduled so far in advance, and so it's one of those things where you're kind of just lucky, and you hope that the team that you schedule, if you're maybe a Group of 5 team that has their eyes set on a New Year's Six bowl game or a playoff berth, whatever. You hope that team is good. I mean, think about it this way. Cincinnati, fantastic last year, started the year at number 9. But what if Notre Dame had been horrible? What if Notre Dame was in this horrible slump? What if Notre Dame had lost their first few games of the year last year, had lost to Toledo, and it was a not a top 25 team, or was right on right at the bottom of it? Does that keep them out of the playoff? It's still a tough South Bend. It's a road game, win at South Bend. But if Notre Dame's not good, and same with all these, marquee matchups that we see now is, we'll see in 2028, we're going to get, I'm just making something up here. We're going to see Alabama play, Miami, or Alabama's going to play, Texas again or whatever. Well, we don't know what these teams are going to be like in 2028. Alabama could fall off. Texas could be great. What looks like for some of these things, a top 10 matchup in the moment, 6-7 years from now might not be. And then that affects your strength of schedule. Right now, it would look like a great strength of schedule, great resume booster. Down the road, it doesn't. And so, not to say, oh, Houston should deserve some, consideration because they can't help their strength of schedule in their conference. I mean, I'm not saying that at all. I do agree with you on your BYU take in the sense of their strength of schedule is very, very loaded. And I think they did a fantastic job scheduling these teams in preparation for their move to the Big 12. I mean, you and I were talking about that before the show. We've got Oregon, you have Arkansas, you have Baylor, you have Notre Dame, all those teams that BYU is going to have to face, that if they were to run the table undefeated, they would have a very strong case because all those teams that we just mentioned have the potential to be top 15 teams when BYU faces them. And so if you beat all of those teams, take care of your cupcake opponents. They've got a game against Boise later in the year that could be a fringe top 25 team, depending on how the year goes. They would be in contention for that spot. And I wouldn't put it past, strength of schedule is there, and I wouldn't put it past the committee to strongly consider them more than they have in the past, strictly because of their move to the Big 12. It's like, hey, they're moving next year. It'll look good, especially for the Big 12 to be like, look, we're ushering in a playoff team from last year. We're adding, especially with Texas and Oklahoma starting to move out too. Because, whether you want to believe it or not, the committee and a lot of these places are very political.
Yeah.
But I do agree. I agree with your take. I mean, you and I were talking about that too. From a group of 5 standpoint, the best chance for one to get in there, if you don't want to say BYU, obviously, it would have to be a team out of the American because that's the strongest group of 5 conference. And it's not going to be Cincinnati. It's not going to be Houston. It's not going to be UCF. So ultimately, it's just not going to happen. I think it's not a once in a lifetime thing, but it's a very rare thing to have happened last year with Cincinnati.
Well, and I'll say this too: you're not going to see another group of 5 team make the playoff for the remainder of the 4-team playoff format.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, once it expands, whether it's 8 or especially if it's 12, but even if it's 8, I'll listen in on takes for those group of 5 teams every few years. But for now, with the 4-team format, I don't think you're ever going to see another group of 5 team make it.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment because you're right. I don't think you're going to find another group of 5 team that is set up talent-wise like Cincinnati was, and is set up schedule-wise like Cincinnati was. Because what people also tend to forget is that those teams it's a building process. Obviously, Luke Fickell. You go look at his run at Cincinnati. The first couple of years were like 4-8. It took time. You don't go from 4-8 as a group of 5 team. You don't go from 4-8 to playoff team like that. It just doesn't happen. It took time to build themselves up, earning that respect, earning the fear and respect of their opponents. And like you said, even though they fell to Georgia in that Peach Bowl the year before they made the playoff, obviously that I think showed a lot of people across the country that, hey, they could hang with some elite talent, the best of the best. And Georgia certainly was that. So, yeah, I love the take. I think you're exactly right. And for me, that's all the more reason that we get some college football playoff expansion here in a few years.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to. I think we are going to see playoff expansion. I think it's inevitable. One thing that I have learned just in the last couple of years, especially, is that change is inevitable, especially with these upcoming generations. And change is inevitable with college football. We're seeing that right now. Change is inevitable with everything right now, including gas prices that fluctuate every single week. So, I'm gassed up to see a playoff expansion.
Hey, same here. And hopefully it'll happen soon. We talked about that in previous live streams. I'm sure we're going to do that down the road. We'll probably end up doing our own little, towards the end of the year, having our own little expansion playoff show just to see what it would look like in our eyes if we were the committee, which we do like to play the role of committee because we typically don't like their rankings when they come out in November. So fantastic takes. Connor, what I'm going to do for the last couple of minutes here on our stream is obviously hit up a couple of people in the chat. If they've got any questions and stuff or comments that we want to address, kind of throw them up there, and then we'll slowly start to wrap things up. But do want to give a shout out to Dale Campbell showing up. Appreciate you. Good morning. Talk is Pitt, John Sarian. Who else? We got Waves on Swim, Matthew Hazelhorst, of course. Sweet Melissa, who used to be Melissa May. So good to see you, Melissa. Roll Tide. Always love getting some homers in here. So good to see you. One thing I saw a comment pop up, Connor. Let me see if I can find it again. And maybe it'll pop up on your screen too. I don't know. There's some CCD here. Let me see. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. All right. So I like this comment a lot here from CCD. Respond to John. You're not trying to sound like those random third eye woke people, but he believes that the AP made Notre Dame 5th to hype up the Week 1 game against Ohio State as a top 5 matchup. And I will say this. I want to get your take on this, but I will say this first. First off, my take, I agree with that because, and I think the AP poll does that a lot. And we address that every week. What we do here on the channel is we put out the AP rankings and tell you what they did wrong. And then what we're hoping to start doing is to share how we believe these teams should be ranked. But what the Associated Press does, and what the playoff committee does for that matter too, is it's all clickbait, right? It's all about what's going to catch the eye of the viewer when we're showing those promos on ESPN, when you're scrolling through the ESPN app and you see the 2 top 5 teams playing each other in Week 1. What's going to catch your eye, right? And that's it. I think a lot of times I do that with rivals. It's, what the hell? Let's put, Oregon at 20th and Oregon State at 21st. That's going to look fun. And then they're going to play each other next week. Oh, look at that. They do this stuff. Oh, you know what? Let's get lazy. Let's rank 3 straight SEC teams, 18, 19, 20, 3 in a row. Whatever they want to do. It's laziness on the Associated Press's part. I think it's laziness here because let me tell you something. This is a top 5 matchup. Ohio State's favored by 18 points.
Yeah, The
I
spread,
mean,
I think it opened up at like months ago. I think it opened up like at, I want to say it was around 13 and a half. And then just a week ago, it was like 14 and a half. And then in the last few days, it's increased by like 3.5.
right. I mean, let's think about that here. I personally agree that or believe that Ohio State is going to run away with this game. I don't know if they're going to necessarily cover by 18. We'll possibly put that pick out with our expert picks for those of you who have signed up, or hopefully will sign up soon. But I do think Ohio State wins this game comfortably, and I've been saying that since June. That Notre Dame doesn't have the talent. I love Marcus Freeman. I really don't have anything against Ohio State or Notre Dame, but in the horseshoe at night, it's just not going to happen.
No, Ohio State. This might be one of those games where you tune on your TV. If you didn't watch College Game Day, you might already have the game on. But it's going to be one of those like 21-3, 21-7 games in the blink of an eye, and Ohio State never looks back. And in terms of like, if the Buckeyes cover the spread, I think that's going to be a matter of what the garbage time points are for Notre Dame, if there are garbage time points. But, here's another thing to keep in mind. For those who are making the take that Notre Dame is going to keep it close, I don't see how they can, because this is an Ohio State team who's hungry. They are wanting to prove a point. And here's what's even the more frightening thing. Even if Ohio State's defense didn't come out to try to prove a point in this game, you have an inexperienced quarterback for Notre Dame who's attempted 35 passes in his collegiate career, and a Notre Dame receiving core that could be better, to say the least. They're a little void of proven guys right now. Tight end is obviously really good, and Michael Mayer, but the offensive line, they bring back a lot, but they struggled last year. And they're going to have some inexperienced offensive tackles that are going to be coming back from injury. We'll see what they do, because, again, this is going to be a hungry Ohio State defense that's going to be coming out to prove a point. And you got Jim Knowles, who, if I am not mistaken, he likes to bring the blitz. So this Notre Dame offense is going to be tested very quickly. And I don't know if they have the guys at the skill positions to really test this Ohio State defense and try to exploit them. I think this game could get ugly pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I want to give a shout out again to CCD. Threw his comment up there again. Thank you again for the super chat, my man. Again, all that money funneled right back into the channel, and we really, really appreciate that. And he feels very confident that he's actually taking Ohio State at 17.5 right now.
I agree.
And I think, I love what you said about the Ohio State defense, and that's the storyline that I think a lot of people are trying to follow right now. Is we have no doubt that the offense is going to be spectacular. Stroud, Travion Henderson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harris. I mean, all those guys that are back for Ohio State that are going to lie to us about every team. And say what you want. Oh, Marcus Freeman's a defensive-minded coach. Yeah, he is. But I don't know if he's going to be able to handle that type of offense in week one. The defense for Ohio State is what people are saying that might be the claim to keep Notre Dame in the game. Jim Knowles, someone made a point to me the other day. They said, you look at Jim Knowles and how well he did at Oklahoma State last year, especially. The defense was phenomenal. It was very stout. But you could easily make the argument that the talent that Knowles is inheriting in just his first year in Columbus is better than anything that he worked with during his time at Oklahoma State, just from a recruiting standpoint and a star standpoint, a talent standpoint. Whether you agree with that or not, up to you. But regardless, Knowles is one of the better defensive minds in the country. He's had a whole offseason to work with this defense that, yes, was atrocious last year. But again, as I said, he's facing a Notre Dame team in week one at home at night with a Notre Dame offense that doesn't have the talent to keep up with them step for step. They just really don't.
And you know what? I know statistically, Notre Dame's defense finished, I think, top 20. Yeah, top 20 last year, and at least points given up. They only beat 4 teams with a winning record last year, Notre Dame. I should also let you know those 4 teams, Toledo, who they almost lost to, and it's Toledo. It's not like, oh, yeah, we beat Toledo, man. We beat a team with a winning record. Okay.
Right.
If you think that's a great win, okay, well, you know what Ohio State thinks is a great win? A Utah team in the Rose Bowl. So there's a difference of degree there. And then they beat Wisconsin. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't Wisconsin have some little bit of issues with their quarterback and their offense?
Oh, yeah.
And that was also early in the season when Wisconsin just could not move the ball at all. And then they played Purdue, and they beat Purdue and Virginia, who finished with winning records. But you know what should also be noted from those games? Virginia was without Brennan Armstrong, and Purdue didn't have Aiden O'Connell slotted in as a starting quarterback. So, and in the other games that that Notre Dame played in, they were kind of questionable on defense. They were outgained in half their games this past season, and they were, I think, 5-2 in games they got outgained. Like they were outgained in half their games. That's not a top 10 team. Certainly not a top 5 team. And it's not like they faced a gauntlet of a schedule. And I know people were saying, well, Notre Dame closed out the season pretty well last year. That's because they played Stanford and Georgia Tech and a Virginia team without Brennan Armstrong. That's no offense to Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame is one of the best brands of all time. Like, no matter how you think they might fall off the map, they're always going to be Notre Dame. Like, they're always going to be pretty good. But they're not elite. And you can make whatever argument you want about how they do in all the other games against, they always finish, with like 10-plus wins, whatnot. When they get to a big game, they're not keeping it competitive either. I don't think they're an elite team. So you can throw out any stat line you want. I know what I see when I see Notre Dame play a truly elite team on the field. It's never competitive, at least in recent years, with the modernization of college football, obviously. Yeah, I don't care what happened 30, 40 years ago. I'm talking 21st century here.
Right. That's been the storyline, is for years and years and years under Brian Kelly was his inability to win those big games. I mean, the national championship over Alabama got blown out in that game, got blown out in the 2 playoff appearances he had, both against Clemson and against Alabama. Couldn't win either of those. So they've been to 1 national championship and got, in the modern era, that was in 2012, got blown out in that game very, very bad to Alabama. And even in the big time bowl games, they struggled big time to win those under Brian Kelly. I mean, lost to Ohio State a couple of years ago in the Fiesta Bowl, lost that one. They obviously lost this last year, even under Marcus Freeman, first year, blew a huge lead, lost to Oklahoma State. Probably should have won that game, but they didn't. And again, I think part of the reason that people are excited under Marcus Freeman, it's new, young, energetic head coach that could maybe come in here and not change the culture. Notre Dame's got a great culture, but it's a matter of coming in there and changing the culture of winning, because it's great to win 10, 11, sometimes 12 games a year. Great, good for you. But eventually, as a team, you get tired of that if it's not resulting in a national championship or even just a big-time bowl victory. Because, I mean, congrats if you win the Citrus Bowl or the, Music City Bowl or whatever it is. But people want those New Year's Six playoff-type victories, and Notre Dame is struggling to get that. And I agree. It's not going to come against Ohio State. Simply, it's just not going to come in week 1. And we're going to, again, result back to this talk of when will they finally break through and win the big games. And I don't know if it ever will happen.
CCD has the Maryland logo. Hey, I give a quick shout out to Maryland this coming season. They're going to beat somebody good. You watch. They've got an incredible offense. I'm not saying they're going to go 9-3. They've got a really difficult schedule. Of course, they play in the Big Ten East. Their November slate is one of the most difficult in the country. But that receiving core for Maryland, some defensive backfields are going to be receiving some heck this coming season. That receiving core is as good as it gets. They've got 3 guys who are going to be drafted next April. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what this Maryland offense can do. Obviously, the question is their defense. Obviously, that's in every single preview magazine. Everybody knows that.
Right.
But did you know that Maryland's going to beat somebody pretty good this year, I think? I mean, what's your take on that? You think Maryland's going to upset somebody?
Oh, 100%. I can't remember who I have Maryland beating in our pre. I got about 7-5 right now, and I also said they could easily go 8-4. It's 7-5, 8-4. CCD's got him at 9-3. Put that up there. Obviously, he's got 9-3. If the defense can overachieve, so obviously that's the biggest concern. I think I've got him beating
Purdue.
I think I've got him beating Michigan State. I think, which would be a big time win to an extent. I believe it's at Maryland. Obviously, we know how bad Michigan State's secondary was last year, but when that game's played, Michigan State easily could be a top 15, maybe even top 10 team. It's early in the year, and Maryland probably wouldn't be ranked or would be around the outside. And I do think they're going to win that game.
And I agree with that. If I were to point the one game where Maryland pulls off the upset, I'd pick Michigan State. You know who the Spartans play the following week, right?
Is it Ohio State after that?
Yeah. So could be a little bit of look ahead, at least at
Yeah.
some point in the game. Could be. So I say that a little sarcastically. But Maryland's going to be, if you're one of those people who think Maryland's going to go 5-7 or 6-6 would be a bowl game, obviously. But if you're thinking 4-8, 5-7, you might regret that pretty quickly.
Yeah, gotta think again, because I agree. This is Mike Locksley finally got over the hump last year, getting them to a bowl game, winning that bowl game in dominating fashion, and that for any team that brings a lot of momentum into the following year. You know, you benefit from bowl practices, you're high off a bowl win, and you return so much. And we hyped that up in our Maryland prediction video too, which you mentioned, the wide receiver core. That offense is going to be, I mean, probably up there as one of the best, not just in the Big Ten, maybe in the country.
Yeah.
Tagovailoa can sling it. The wide receiver core is ridiculous. And again, they shore up just a few things on defense. Again, we have them at 7-5, but we mentioned a couple close losses in there. Easily could transition to 1 or 2 more and having them at 9-3, something like that. And last thing we'll do before we actually log off here, I want to say on the topic of Maryland, I am very intrigued by the Ohio State game for them. Second to last game of the year. They get Ohio State a few years ago. We saw where Maryland almost beat Ohio State. The offense for Maryland has enough to keep up with Ohio State, I think, step for step, especially if the Buckeyes defense isn't fully fixed. It's the week before Michigan for Ohio State. So you want to talk about a look ahead, talk about a team that's in the playoff hunt by season's end, looking to get revenge over their rival they lost to last year. Maryland, I'm not saying is going to beat them. I've obviously got Ohio State winning that game, but I think they could be very, very close and very, very high scoring.
So do you remember the last time in a more, shall I say, normal season in an even year, which has been 4 years? You remember the last time Ohio State went to Maryland? What happened?
Yeah, exactly. Like 52-51. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. And Maryland should have won that game. Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
That guy was wide open for 2 points at the end of the game. And not just that, like they had other opportunities to kind of put the game away. They had a touchdown lead with like 1:40 to go now. But you know what's interesting? You were talking about the look-ahead spots. So here's what's interesting. They get essentially every team that's going to be favored against them and potential look-ahead spots for those teams. Michigan has to play Maryland before Michigan plays Iowa. We obviously just talked about Michigan State having to play Ohio State after Maryland. They get Purdue, not exactly in a look ahead, but Purdue's going to be coming off a huge game against Minnesota. And there's potential, starting off a little bit sluggish for Purdue in that game against Maryland. By the way, if you're looking for a track meet this coming year, Purdue and Maryland's going to be a really fun game.
Oh, for sure.
And then, like you mentioned, they get Ohio State before Ohio State plays Michigan. They get Wisconsin off a bye for Maryland. Wisconsin will also be coming off a bye. But yeah, Maryland's intriguing this year. I think they could 7-5 is my record prediction for them as well, but I could see 8-4.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that a lot. I think I think Mike Locksley, like I said, has really turned the program around, and I think they're going to be one of the more underrated teams to watch within the Big Ten. Everybody in the Big Ten East is occupied by Ohio State and Michigan State now, even Penn State. And you got Maryland down there. Towards the bottom, you got Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, guys like that people aren't really talking about. And Indiana, Rutgers, understandably. But, Maryland, a team that probably isn't getting as much attention as they should, is bound to spring up a few upsets or two and will find themselves in a decent bowl game by December or January. So,
and I do want to talk about one more team in the Big Ten. By the way, the Big Ten West is going to be so much fun this year. Like, I know Nebraska just lost to Northwestern, but like there's still a chance like Nebraska could finish like 6-6 or 7-5. Like there is still a chance for that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The West is just a bunch of evenly matched teams this year. It's pretty much what schedule it sets up the best for a particular team is probably going to win that division, which then again, if that's the case, it goes to Purdue. So, but I question Wisconsin to a degree. I know they're getting a lot of love in the media. I know you have them winning the West, and believe me, they could easily win the West this year. I just don't think their record's going to be that good. But again, it may not take a great record to win the West this year. But I question Wisconsin because last year they finished with the number 1 overall defense, statistically speaking, better than Georgia. And it was a tremendous defense. They leaned heavily on that defense because obviously their offense struggled. The defense loses 8 starters. Now, for those of you who are probably going to say, well, it's Wisconsin, they're always going to be good on defense. The last time Jim Leonhard had to replace 8 starters on defense was in 2018, going into the 2018 season. That was the one season Wisconsin kind of fell off a little defensively. They finished 35th in the country that year in total defense. Now, I'm not saying they're going to fall off that much, but what I'm saying is I bet they're not number one again. And that was the number one defense last year they had, and they went 8-4 in the regular season. On top of that, Wisconsin has a brand new receiving core, an offensive line that it's going to be probably a pretty good Wisconsin offensive line, but they have their questions, and essentially 4 new starters slotted into different spaces, and a questionable quarterback, to say the least, who threw more interceptions than touchdowns last year. So, and I'm not saying Wisconsin's defense is going to be bad. I just don't think it's going to be number one again in the country. Right. And with the questionable receiving core, which helped out Graham Mertz at times last year, I just don't see it with Wisconsin this year. I don't see any kind of breakthrough, bounce back to the near 6. So I know people's projections and models are going to have Wisconsin as the heavy favorite for the West. I don't get it. Like, I'm not saying they can't win the West. Again, it may only take an 8-4 record to win the West this year, but I don't see any heavy favorite by any means for any team, and especially not Wisconsin. I don't get it. I mean, what do you see in Wisconsin that could potentially lead to like 10, 11 wins? Because I don't see it.
Nothing. I don't have them reaching that point. The thing that has to improve the most for Wisconsin is their quarterback play. Graham Mertz, for years, quarterback play has been the one thing that's held Wisconsin back from being special. You know, they've prided themselves on a great offensive line. They've prided themselves on a great defense. They've never had the quarterback to pair. I mean, running games usually pretty solid. They never had the quarterback to get them that next level. People thought that was going to be Graham Mertz, and he has failed to do that. And so unless he just has a breakout year, which I'm not banking on, I still think Wisconsin wins at least 8 games because they do have the talent to do that. I've got them at 9 games and being in contention for the Big Ten West, just because, you know, for me, it is very wide open, but I still think they're still better than the likes of, you know, like a Nebraska. You know, they typically do very well against Minnesota, you know, Illinois, guys like that. I still think they're the better team there. But I don't see anything that's going to get them over to that double-digit win mark.
No.
Just because simply of how much they've lost. Again, simply because they don't have the quarterback to get the job done. And
last season, we saw a lot of streaks come to an end, like long extending streaks, like, you know, Utah beating BYU, Oregon State losing in the Coliseum at USC. They finally won over there. So we saw a lot of streaks come to an end. If you're looking for a streak, maybe 2 to come to an end this year, I would say Florida's winning streak against Tennessee is going to come to an end. I think Tennessee's winning that game. And dare I say, I think Purdue could finally beat Wisconsin.
I love it. And I think that's how we'll end it off. We talked a lot about Purdue today, and you know, Connor very, very high on Purdue, and me too, but he a little bit more so than I am, having them winning the Big Ten West, possibly ending their losing streak to Wisconsin. Again, fresh off their first 9-win season since 2003. Let's see if they can get even better in 2022. I'm really, really looking forward to that. So, guys, I want to thank you all for joining us again this morning. We went almost an hour and a half today, a little bit longer live stream, but clearly well worth it. Some great discussion. Connor, really want to thank you for joining us again today. Guys, he is the College Football Encyclopedia. Great content over on his page. Again, the link for that down in the description below. Look him up over on Instagram. He's got some great stories on there. Obviously, great fan engagement, great posts across the board. So again, if you want some extra just football fill on your social media stream, and real quick, do you have a Twitter, Connor? We've been asked that. Do you have a Twitter account?
Yeah, but it's not like a College Football Encyclopedia account. It's just my personal. I don't really tweet a whole lot on there, but I mean, I used to tweet more often for college football. I just check news on Twitter now. Instagram is really where I put my content on.
Okay, so Instagram is going to be the main source, CCD. Just for anybody that's asking, check him out on Instagram. That's where you're going to get your main source of information. And we definitely, over the course of the season, plan on having Connor back on the show. So if you enjoyed this live stream, guys, definitely stay tuned. We definitely plan on having him back. But Connor, really appreciate you for joining us, man. Looking forward to a great season.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Hey, absolutely. Anytime. So, guys, again, thank you for joining us again. Gridiron Expert on YouTube, back with another live stream. CCD, we appreciate you. Michael Hogg, Melissa, appreciate you. Scotty, Michael, Haas Outdoors, everybody else that we may not have mentioned already, F123, Waves on Swim, Talk is Pit, Matthew, all of you guys, we really appreciate you joining us. We'll be back again tomorrow morning with another live stream, but later tonight, or this afternoon, actually, we'll be here with the Backyard Brawl predictions. We've got a lot of content coming out over this week because college football, again, really gets going on Thursday. Bobby, we appreciate you waking up early in Vegas. No better place to be for the start of college football. So appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your morning. Have a great day, and we'll see you here in a couple hours again, not for a live stream, but with a prediction video, and then we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.